The roll call happened every morning. Names shouted into the cold air, voices answering back, until one morning, only one voice remained. His name was Johann Keller. He stood alone in the forest clearing, boots sunk into mud mixed with blood and melted snow. Around him, nothing moved. No laughter, no complaints, no curses about the cold, just silence. The officer read the list anyway. Keller listened as familiar names were spoken. Hans, Otto, Friedrich, Karl. Each name echoed like a ghost stepping forward, and then disappearing. Present, Keller whispered for them, not because he was ordered to, because someone had to. 3 days earlier, his unit had been 23 men. Now there was one, him. The battle had been short and violent. Artillery tore through the trees. Machine gun fire stitched the ground. Men fell without screaming. Johann survived because he was sent to fetch ammunition. A simple order, a meaningless task. By the time he returned, the forest had swallowed his unit whole. He walked among bodies he knew by heart. A man he shared cigarettes with. A boy who talked about his mother every night. A friend who swore he would survive the war. Johann didn't cry. Shock stole tears before grief could reach them. He collected dog tags, one by one. Each metal clink sounded louder than gunfire. By sunset, he carried the weight of an entire unit around his neck. That night, Johann sat alone in a trench meant for many. He ate alone, listened alone, breathed alone, and for the first time, he realized something terrifying. He had survived, and survival felt wrong, because every breath he took was one they could not. As the wind moved through the destroyed forest, Johann whispered into the dark, "I'm still here." The forest did not answer. The war had taken his unit. Now it would take something else. His peace. They transferred Johann Keller 2 days later. No ceremony, no questions. Just a paper stamped and a rifle placed back into his hands. The new unit was smaller. Tired faces. Men who had already learned not to ask for names too quickly. Johann noticed something immediately. They looked at him differently. Not with hatred. With caution. Like a man who walks out of a burning house while everyone else stays behind. At first, they tried to be polite. A soldier offered him a cigarette. Johann accepted. The man hesitated before sitting beside him, then chose a different crate. At meals, there was always space next to Johann. Too much space. Whispers traveled faster than orders. That's him. The only one who came back. His whole unit wiped out. Bad luck follows men like that. Johann pretended not to hear. But silence has a way of speaking louder than words. At night, in the barracks, men talked about home, about wives, about farms, about children they hadn't met yet. Johann stayed quiet, because every time he spoke, the room felt colder. When he finally lay down to sleep, the faces returned. Not dreams, memories. Hans calling for help. Otto laughing just seconds before he fell. The sound of Friedrich choking on blood. Johann woke up gasping, nails digging into the wooden floor. Sweat soaked his uniform in freezing air. One soldier muttered from the darkness, "Jesus, what's wrong with him?" Johann sat outside until morning, watching the sky, waiting for something, anything to make sense. The next patrol came quickly. Forest again, always forests. Johann walked behind the squad, every snapped branch sounding like a rifle shot. When artillery thundered in the distance, his legs locked. A younger soldier noticed. "You scared?" the boy asked. Johann wanted to say yes. Instead, he said nothing. Minutes later, enemy fire erupted. Men dropped. Chaos swallowed the trail. Johann moved without thinking, dragging wounded men, returning fire, pulling someone out of the kill zone. When it ended, 3 men were alive, including Johann. Again, the looks changed. Not fear now. Something worse. Suspicion. That night, the sergeant called him aside. "You fight well," he said slowly, "but men are uneasy around you." Johann nodded. He already knew. "You survive when others don't," the sergeant continued. "That makes people nervous." Johann finally spoke. "Do you think I want this?" The sergeant had no answer. Later, Johann sat alone, cleaning his rifle. He counted the scratches on the metal. Each one felt earned. Each one felt stolen. Survival had become his curse, not because he lived, but because everyone else kept dying. He pressed his dog tags together, not his own, theirs, and whispered again, softer this time. "I didn't choose this. The war didn't care. It never did." Johann Keller received his next order without ceremony. No speech, no motivation, just a red circle drawn on a map. "You're going here," the lieutenant said flatly. "Enemy presence is heavy." Johann stared at the map. The same sector, a place where previous patrols had vanished without reports. The squad was small, too small, young faces, untrained eyes. Johann saw his younger self in them, the version of him that still believed. Survival meant something. They marched at first light. The forest grew thicker with every step. Sunlight disappeared. The air felt heavy, almost hostile. Johann's heartbeat echoed inside his helmet. With every step, one thought repeated, "This is where I die." Then another. "Maybe today it ends." The first gunshot shattered the silence. One soldier collapsed instantly. No scream, no warning. Another ran. His foot triggered a mine. Smoke, fire, a scream that cut straight through the trees. Johann moved without thinking. Cover, return fire. Dragging a wounded man by his collar. It felt unreal, like watching himself from a distance. Time stopped making sense. When the gunfire finally ended, only 2 men remained alive. Johann and a boy no older than 18. The boy was shaking. "Why us?" he cried. "Why did everyone else die?" Johann had no answer. When they returned to camp, no one greeted them. No congratulations. No questions. The lieutenant simply said, "You survived again," as if survival was a mistake. That night, Johann was summoned. High command. Reports were spread across the table. Failed missions. Heavy losses. One name appeared again and again. Johann Keller. "You will continue to receive high-risk assignments," an officer said. "You adapt?" Johann asked quietly. "And if I don't return?" The officer shrugged. "Then someone else will be sent." In that moment, Johann understood. He was no longer a soldier. He was an experiment. Later, standing outside the barracks, Johann looked up at the stars. The same stars he had once seen above his home. But now they offered no comfort. For the first time, he thought, maybe my purpose is only to watch others die. That night, Johann made a decision. If death was searching for him, he would not run. He would face it head on. Johann Keller stopped sleeping after that mission. When he closed his eyes, faces appeared. Men who had trusted him. Men who had followed him. Men who never came back. The army called it experience. Johann called it memory rot. Every morning, new names were posted on the board. Replacements. Fresh boots. Clean uniforms. Eyes that still believed war was a story with heroes. Johann avoided looking at them. He knew what happened to men who stood too close to him. 3 days later, the order arrived. Another mission. Another red circle. Another impossible objective. This time, Johann was placed in charge. Not because he was brave. Not because he was skilled. Because he survived. The squad gathered around him. 10 men. One of them smiled nervously. "Sir, they say you always come back." Johann didn't respond. They moved out before dawn. The terrain was broken. Burned villages, collapsed houses, frozen bodies half buried in mud. This wasn't a battlefield. It was a cemetery pretending to be land. Halfway through the village, Johann raised his fist. "Stop. Something felt wrong. Too quiet. Then, a window shattered. Gunfire erupted from every direction. The squad scattered. One man was hit in the throat. Another crawled, screaming, until a second bullet ended it. Johann dragged 2 soldiers behind a stone wall. He returned fire, controlled, precise. But it didn't matter. They were surrounded. Minutes felt like hours. By the time the shooting stopped, Johann counted again. 3 left. Only 3. One of them, a corporal, stared at Johann with hollow eyes. "They keep sending us because of you," the man whispered. "You're cursed." Johann wanted to deny it, but he couldn't. On the march back, the corporal stepped on a mine. Johann didn't even turn. He already knew the sound. Back at headquarters, Johann stood in front of the officer. Losses were discussed like numbers, like broken equipment. "High casualties again," the officer said. "But acceptable." Johann clenched his fists. "Acceptable for whom?" he asked. The room went silent. The officer leaned forward. "You are not paid to question outcomes." That night, Johann sat alone, cleaning his rifle. His hands were steady. His heart was empty. He thought about home, about the version of himself that had once believed in duty. That man was dead. The next morning, Johann was called again. A new assignment, even more dangerous, almost suicidal. As Johann walked out, a young recruit approached him. "Sir," the boy said quietly, "how do you survive?" Johann looked at him for a long moment, then answered honestly, "You don't." That night, Johann made a silent vow. If he was going to die, it would not be for meaningless orders. The war was turning him into a ghost, and ghosts don't follow commands. Johann Keller realized something terrifying. He was no longer afraid of dying. What frightened him now was surviving. The days blurred together. March, fire, retreat, repeat. The war was no longer loud. It was heavy. Heavy on the chest, heavy on the mind, heavy on the soul. Johann stopped counting days. He counted faces instead, faces that disappeared. Every time a new unit formed, Johann was reassigned. Not because he requested it, because commanders believed his presence increased survival. They were wrong. Survival followed him. Death circled him. In the next engagement, the squad advanced through a forest turned black by fire. Trees stood like burned skeletons. The air smelled of ash and wet soil. Johann signaled low. Then it happened. Artillery. The ground exploded. Men were thrown like broken dolls. Johann was buried under dirt and wood. For a moment, he thought this was it. Then silence. He dug himself out, coughed, looked around. No voices, no movement, just smoke and pieces of uniforms. Johann stood alone again. That night, he didn't sleep. He sat against a tree and spoke quietly. To no one. "I'm sorry," he whispered. Not to the enemy, to the men who trusted him. A week later, Johann was promoted. He didn't even attend the ceremony. Rank meant nothing when everyone beneath you was dead. A young lieutenant once asked him, "How do you keep going?" Johann replied, "Because stopping doesn't bring them back." The war pressed on. Food became scarce. Ammunition was rationed. Orders were desperate. One mission demanded they hold a ruined factory. No retreat allowed. Johann knew what that meant. Sacrifice. They held the factory for 6 hours. 6 hours of screams, smoke, and collapsing walls. Johann dragged wounded men into cover. He fired until his rifle overheated. By dawn, only Johann stood. Again, the radio crackled. Position status? Johann didn't answer immediately. He looked around the factory. Blood soaked the floor. The walls were black. The silence screamed louder than artillery. "Position held," he finally said. There was no praise, only new coordinates. That night, Johann stared at his reflection in a shattered mirror. His eyes were older than the war, older than hope. He began writing names in a small notebook. Not ranks, not numbers, names. He promised himself one thing. If he survived this war, he would remember them all, because forgetting them would mean the war truly won. By now, Johann Keller understood something no training manual ever taught. Surviving was not a victory. It was a sentence. The nights were the worst. During the day, orders kept his mind busy. At night, the dead spoke. Johann lay inside a shallow trench as rain soaked his coat. Cold water crept into his boots, but he didn't move. He welcomed discomfort. It distracted him from the memories. When he closed his eyes, faces appeared. Not screaming, not crying, just staring, waiting. He heard Franz's voice once. "Why you, Johann?" Johann sat up suddenly, heart racing. There was no one there, only darkness and the distant thunder of artillery. He pressed his hands against his ears. "Stop," he whispered, but guilt doesn't listen. The next morning, Johann was assigned 3 new soldiers. Boys, really. One still had a nervous smile that didn't belong on a battlefield. Johann didn't learn their names. Not anymore. Learning names made losing harder. During patrol, one of them asked, "Corporal, how long have you been here?" Johann answered honestly, "Too long." The patrol was quiet until it wasn't. A single shot. Then chaos. Johann reacted on instinct, pulling one soldier down, shouting orders, firing back. But experience could not bend fate. Within minutes, the forest fell silent again. Johann stood among bodies. Again, one of the boys was still breathing. Barely. Johann knelt beside him, pressing a hand against the wound. "I'm here," Johann said, though he didn't know why. The boy looked at him with glassy eyes. "Did we win?" Johann swallowed. "Yes," he lied. The boy smiled, then went still. That night, Johann broke. Not loudly, not violently. He sat alone and laughed. A quiet, broken laugh that scared even him. "What kind of soldier survives everyone?" he muttered. He began to believe he was cursed. That death followed him but refused to take him. In his notebook, the list of names grew longer. Johann noticed something disturbing. He had started forgetting faces. Names remained, but faces blurred. The war was stealing even his memories. Weeks later, Johann received leave, a rare gift. He traveled through shattered towns and empty stations. Civilians stared at him like he was a ghost. Maybe he was. At home, his mother hugged him and cried. Johann stood stiff, unsure how to respond. Her tears felt heavier than bullets. That night, lying in his childhood bed, Johann couldn't sleep. The silence felt wrong. No explosions, no screams. His heart raced anyway. He realized something terrifying. Peace felt unfamiliar, and that meant the war had already won something it could never give back. When orders came for his return to the front, Johann didn't resist. Part of him wanted it. The battlefield was the only place his pain made sense. As the train carried him back, Johann stared out the window and whispered, "If I survive again, I'll carry them with me." He didn't know yet. The war wasn't finished testing him. The front had changed again. New maps, new orders, same death. Johann Keller marched through the remains of a village that no longer had a name. The signpost lay broken in the mud. Letters burned away by fire. Houses stood open like empty mouths, their insides blackened by smoke. This time, Johann felt something different. Not fear, not sadness, anger. A slow, boiling rage that sat deep in his chest. He no longer whispered the names of the dead. He no longer asked why. Those questions had exhausted him. Instead, every step forward felt heavy with resentment. Not at the enemy alone, but at the war itself, and at himself. A lieutenant briefed them quickly. Johann barely listened. Words like advance, hold, possible resistance floated past him without meaning. What meaning was left? As the unit moved out, Johann noticed something unsettling. He felt nothing. Gunfire erupted ahead. The familiar crack of rifles echoed through the ruins. Johann moved automatically, taking cover, returning fire, signaling others forward. His body remembered what his mind refused to feel. A man fell beside him, screaming. Johann didn't rush. That scared him. Moments later, the screaming stopped. The fight ended as suddenly as it began. Smoke drifted through the air, mixing with dust and ash. Johann stood up slowly, scanning the area. No relief, no victory, only emptiness. Later that night, Johann sat alone near a collapsed wall. He cleaned his rifle with mechanical precision. His hands didn't shake anymore. A younger soldier approached him cautiously. "Corporal, how do you stay calm?" Johann looked up. The boy's face reminded him of Franz. "Too much." "I don't," Johann replied. "I just stopped caring." The words surprised even him. The boy hesitated. "Does it get easier?" Johann stared into the darkness. "No," he said. "You just get harder. And that's worse." The next mission pushed Johann past a line he didn't know he still had. They encountered prisoners, enemy soldiers, disarmed, exhausted, barely standing. One of Johann's men raised his rifle. Johann stepped forward instinctively. "Stop." The soldier hesitated. "Orders say." I said stop. The silence that followed was heavy. Johann stared at the prisoners. They looked like his men had once looked. Hungry, afraid, broken. For a moment, Johann imagined himself standing there instead. Something inside him snapped. He turned away. "Take them back," he ordered. Alive. Later, alone, Johann trembled. Not from fear, but from fury. Not at the men who wanted to shoot. At the fact that part of him understood why they did. That night, Johann punched the dirt until his knuckles bled. "Enough," he whispered. But war doesn't stop when asked. Days blurred together. March, fire, silence, repeat. Johann noticed a dangerous thought forming in his mind. If everyone dies anyway, why should I care who lives? The realization horrified him. He was becoming what he hated. During a bombardment, Johann found himself shouting at the sky. Not prayers, not curses, just raw rage. Shells exploded around him, earth raining down, but he didn't flinch. He welcomed it. If death wanted him, it knew where to find him. But again, it passed him by. After the barrage, Johann stood alone amid the wreckage. His unit was gone, scattered, wounded, dead. Again, he laughed once more, bitter and hollow. "So that's it?" he muttered. "I live, and everyone else pays?" In the distance, flares lit the sky red. Johann felt something shift inside him. Not hope, not fear. A decision. If he was cursed to survive, then he would choose how. He would not let the war turn him into a monster, even if it killed him. As Johann picked up his rifle and moved forward alone, one truth became clear. Survival without purpose was another kind of death, and the war was not done testing him yet. The forest was silent, not the peaceful kind of silence, but the kind that presses against your ears until you hear your own thoughts screaming. Johann Keller sat alone beneath the trees, his back against a thick trunk, rifle across his knees. The fighting had moved elsewhere. No orders had reached him. No voices, no footsteps. Just wind, just shadows, just memory. For the first time in weeks, no one needed him, and that terrified him. He counted the hours by the movement of the moon because time had lost meaning. Hunger came and went. Cold settled into his bones like it planned to stay forever. Johann whispered names into the dark. Franz, Otto, Karl. Men who no longer existed anywhere except inside his head. At some point, he stopped whispering. Talking to the dead made him feel insane. Instead, he listened. Every crack of a branch made his muscles tighten. Every rustle could be death, or worse, another living man who would later die beside him. Sleep came in fragments. When Johann closed his eyes, the war followed him. He saw the village again, the prisoners, the boy who asked if it got easier. He woke up gasping, fingers digging into the dirt, heart racing as if bullets were still flying. Enough, he muttered again, but the word had no power. Days later, maybe it happened. Johann realized something horrifying. He had started talking to himself. Not full sentences, just fragments. Move. Watch left. Too quiet. Orders from voices that no longer existed. He laughed softly. So now I'm the whole unit, he said to the trees. No one answered. He stopped shaving, stopped caring how he looked. His uniform was torn, stained, unrecognizable. He could have been any soldier from any side, or no soldier at all. One evening, Johann found an abandoned farmhouse on the edge of the woods. The roof had collapsed, but one room remained intact. A table, a chair, a broken window. Civilian life, frozen in time. On the wall hung a family photograph, burned at the edges. A mother, a father, 2 children. Johann stared at it for a long time. Then he turned it face down. He couldn't bear it. That night, Johann sat in the chair and finally let himself feel everything he had been, holding back. The guilt crushed him. Why was he alive? He had followed orders. He had survived battles. But survival felt like theft, as if he had stolen life meant for better men. He pressed his fists into his eyes. If this is living, he whispered, then why does it feel like punishment? His thoughts turned darker. What if he just stopped moving, stopped hiding, stopped surviving? The idea wrapped around him like a blanket. Peace through surrender. Johann stood up slowly and walked outside. The night was cold and vast. Somewhere far away, artillery rumbled, reminding him the war still existed. He stepped into the open field. If death wanted him now, it would be easy. He waited. Nothing happened. No shots, no shells, no end. Johann fell to his knees, laughing and crying at the same time. Even now, he said to the sky, "You won't take me?" For the first time, Johann understood the cruelest truth of war. Survival was not always mercy. It could be a sentence. At dawn, Johann returned to the farmhouse. He washed his face with icy water from a broken pump. He looked at his reflection in the cracked glass. He barely recognized the man staring back, but he was still alive, and that meant something, whether he wanted it or not. Johann picked up his rifle. Not with anger, not with duty, but with a quiet resolve. If he was going to live through this hell, he would do it on his own terms. Not as a machine, not as a ghost, but as a man who refused to disappear quietly. As he walked back toward the distant sound of war, Johann knew one thing for certain. The final battles would not just be fought on the front lines. They would be fought inside him. The war did not end with an explosion for Johann Keller. It ended quietly. No dramatic final battle. No heroic last stand. No moment that felt like victory. One morning, the guns simply stopped. Johann stood in the middle of a shattered road, listening to a silence that felt unnatural. For years, sound had meant survival. Gunfire, engines, orders shouted through smoke. Now there was nothing. Men around him whispered rumors. It's over. They've surrendered. Go home, if you can. Home. The word felt foreign. Johann began walking west with a group of survivors. Not a unit. Not brothers in arms. Just broken men sharing the same direction. Along the roads, civilians returned to towns that barely existed anymore. Women searched for names on lists. Old men stared at ruins where their houses once stood. Children played in rubble, too young to understand what had been lost. Johann watched them like a stranger. He was free, but freedom felt heavier than chains. At a small town, an Allied officer took Johann's rifle. "That's it," the man said. "You're done." Johann nodded and handed it over. The rifle left his hands. The war did not. Without the weapon, Johann felt naked, exposed, as if something essential had been taken, not just metal and wood, but purpose. That night, he slept in a barn with dozens of former soldiers. No one spoke much. Some cried softly. Others stared at the ceiling like statues. Johann lay awake. Every time someone coughed, his body tensed. Every creak of wood felt like an incoming shell. Sleep came late, and violently. He dreamed of Franz calling his name. He woke up screaming. When Johann finally reached his hometown weeks later, it was barely recognizable. Buildings stood hollow, streets scarred, familiar places reduced to outlines. His family house still stood, but only just. His mother opened the door and froze. For a moment, she didn't recognize him. Then she did. She cried without sound, gripping his coat like he might vanish if she let go. Johann stood stiff, unsure how to respond. He wanted to feel relief. Instead, he felt numb. At dinner, his father asked simple questions. "Did you eat? Are you safe now? You're home." Home. Johann nodded, but his eyes stayed fixed on the table. At night, the real war began. There were no bombs, only memories. Johann couldn't sleep in silence. It was too loud. He startled at footsteps. He flinched when doors slammed. Once, a dropped plate sent him diving to the floor. Everyone stared. Embarrassment burned hotter than fear. In the weeks that followed, people celebrated peace. Flags appeared. Music returned. Laughter filled streets again. Johann felt like a ghost walking through someone else's world. People asked, "Are you glad it's over?" He didn't know how to answer. How do you explain that the war followed you home? That peace felt undeserved? That every morning you woke up asking why you survived when better men didn't? Johann tried working, tried rebuilding, tried smiling, but every brick reminded him of ruins. Every hammer strike echoed like gunfire. At night, he sat alone, replaying moments he couldn't undo. The prisoners, the orders, the faces. He avoided mirrors. The man staring back looked alive. But inside, Johann felt hollow. One evening, Johann walked to the edge of town, where a small cemetery had grown since the war began. Fresh graves, wooden crosses, no names on many of them. He stood there until darkness fell. "I'm sorry," he whispered. To whom, he wasn't sure. For the first time since the war ended, Johann allowed himself to cry. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly, like a man who didn't know how to live anymore. The world had moved on, but Johann Keller was still standing on the battlefield. Only now he was fighting alone. And the hardest part? There were no orders telling him how to survive peace. The years passed, slow and merciless. Johann Keller aged, as everyone must, yet some part of him remained frozen in that destroyed village, on that shattered battlefield, in the forests where he had screamed at the moon. Time did not heal. It only layered memory on top of memory, each one pressing down like stones on his chest. He tried to live a normal life. He married, though laughter often frightened him. He worked, though silence brought panic. He walked the streets of cities, rebuilding from war, yet the ruins never fully left him. Every sound of machinery reminded him of engines of war. Every child reminded him of the boy who once asked if surviving made it easier. At night, he would open the photo albums of friends long gone. Pictures of men who had laughed, argued, and died while he remained alive. He turned pages slowly, tracing faces with trembling fingers. Sometimes he whispered apologies. Sometimes he shouted at the walls. "I survived," he said. "I survived. And yet, it feels like a curse." Johann's hands shook as he held letters from families of the fallen. Some thanked him for surviving so their stories could live. Others were silent or hateful. He understood both. Survival did not come with gratitude. One winter evening, Johann walked to the top of a hill, overlooking the city that had grown around the ruins. Snow covered the ground, soft and white, masking what had been scarred and broken. He looked down at the streets, imagining the war below them, imagining the soldiers who had never returned. He felt the weight of every life he had witnessed, every scream, every betrayal, every merciful act, and every horrifying order. And he wondered, did surviving make him stronger, or did it make him hollow? A single crow cawed in the distance. He smiled faintly, bitter and sweet. Life went on. The world moved on. Children played. Cars drove. Radios played music. The sounds of ordinary life. So strange, so foreign. Johann closed his eyes, feeling the cold wind against his face. Memories surged. His unit lost. Franz's laughter. The boy in the barn. The prisoners. The forest. The silence. The homes destroyed. The fields burned. All of it. Every ounce of it. And then a strange calmness settled over him. He understood at last that survival was not triumph. It was endurance. It was memory. It was the quiet, uncelebrated heroism of living while the world around you died. Johann sat there, the snow drifting around him like ashes, the sun setting behind distant ruins. He let himself feel the grief, the guilt, the sorrow, and even the faintest flicker of hope that perhaps, just perhaps, bearing witness was enough. The war would never leave him, but neither would life. For a moment he smiled, and the world moved on.